My name is Dorothy Callahan. I'm 68 years old, and on a cold Tuesday morning in March 2026, my daughter-in-law stood in the doorway of my bedroom, the bedroom I had slept in for 34 years, and smiled at me like she was doing me the biggest favor of her life. Dorothy, Amber said, her voice so sweet it could give you cavities, we really think the basement would be perfect for you. Quieter, more private. The natural light from that little window is actually really good for older folks. Not too harsh on the eyes, the basement. My basement in my house. So she could turn my bedroom into her Instagram content studio. What Amber didn't know, what neither she nor my son, Ethan, had bothered to figure out in 2.5 years of living rent-free in my home, was that the woman standing in front of them had spent 35 years making split-second decisions in one of the busiest emergency rooms in Tennessee. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I made a phone call. And 2 weeks later, they got a letter from a property management company informing them that the home they had been treating as their personal property would be rented to new tenants, and they had 30 days to get out. If you're listening from somewhere far away, drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this has traveled. And please, stay with me until the end. Because this isn't just a story about a house. It's about what happens when a woman who spent her whole life taking care of everyone else finally decides to take care of herself. And trust me, it took longer than it should have. I was born in Dayton, Ohio in 1957. Third kid in a family of 5, raised in a house where my dad worked the night shift at a GM plant and my mom worked the front desk at a local clinic. We weren't poor, but we weren't comfortable either. We were the kind of family where you fix things instead of replacing them, where you ate everything on your plate because someone somewhere didn't have a plate at all, and where you didn't complain unless something was actually broken, and sometimes not even then. My mother was the one who pointed me toward nursing. Not in a pushy way, she never pushed. She just had this quiet way of saying things that stuck with you for decades. When I was about 12, she took me to the clinic with her one afternoon because our babysitter canceled, and I watched her work for 3 hours. The way she talked to people, the way she made them feel less scared just by the tone of her voice. I remember thinking, I want to do that. I want to be the person that makes someone feel less scared. I got my nursing degree from Columbus State in 1979. Married Robert Callahan in 1981, the most genuinely good man I have ever known in my life. And I say that not because he's gone and I'm romanticizing him, but because everyone who met Robert said the same thing. He was an engineer, quiet, funny in a dry way that sneaked up on you, and completely incapable of leaving a crooked picture frame alone. We moved to Nashville that same year when he got a job offer he couldn't pass up, and Nashville became home. We had Ethan in 1984, just the one, not by choice exactly. It just worked out that way, and we made our peace with it. Ethan was a good kid, creative, a little scattered, the kind of boy who started 17 projects and finished maybe 4 of them. Robert used to say Ethan had big vision and selective follow-through. We said it affectionately because we thought he'd grow out of it. I spent 35 years at Vanderbilt University Medical Center. Started as a floor nurse, worked my way up to charge nurse in the emergency department, and spent my last 12 years as a nurse manager, which sounds impressive until you realize it mostly means you're the person's responsible for everything that goes wrong on any given shift. I have seen things in that ER that I will carry with me until I die. I have held the hands of strangers in their worst moments. I have been the person who had to walk into a waiting room and say the words that changed a family's life forever. And I have learned, through sheer repetition and necessity, how to stay calm when everything around you is falling apart. That skill, as it turns out, would come in handy in ways I never anticipated. Robert died in December 2015, pancreatic cancer, diagnosed in September, gone by December. 93 days from the phone call that changed everything to the morning I woke up and the house was just quiet in a way it had never been before. He was 58 years old. I was 58 years old. We had talked about retirement, about traveling, about finally taking that trip to Scotland he'd been putting off for 20 years. We ran out of time. Ethan was 30 when his father died. He was living in Memphis then, teaching high school history, a job he'd fallen into after a few other things hadn't worked out, and a job that I thought actually suited him. He came home for the funeral, stayed 2 weeks, and then went back to his life. I understood. That's what adult children do. You grieve together, and then you go back to your lives and you grieve separately. I kept working for 4 more years after Robert died. Not because I needed the money. Our financial situation was solid. Robert had been smart about savings. I had a good pension coming, and we'd paid off the house years earlier. I kept working because the ER was the one place where I always knew exactly what I was supposed to do. When you're 59 years old and your husband is gone and your kid is 3 states away and you come home every night to a house that feels too big and too quiet, having somewhere to go, somewhere that needs you, is not a small thing. I retired in 2019 at 62. Both knees gave me an ultimatum. 12-hour shifts on your feet for 35 years will do that to a person, and honestly, retirement was good. Really good. I had a garden I'd been neglecting for years that suddenly got my full attention. I had a book club, Beverly Hartman and 5 other women, meeting at rotating houses on the third Thursday of every month. Beverly and I had worked together at Vanderbilt for 20 years, and she was and still is my closest friend. Sharp as a tack, funnier than anyone gives her credit for, and the kind of person who will tell you the truth even when you don't want to hear it. I volunteered twice a week at a community health clinic downtown. I learned to make sourdough bread. It took 9 attempts, but the ninth one was genuinely excellent. I traveled a little. I slept 8 hours a night for the first time in decades. I was happy. Genuinely, quietly, solidly happy. And then Ethan called. It was a Tuesday evening in August 2023. I remember because I'd just gotten back from book club, and I was still holding the leftover lemon cake Beverly had insisted I take home. And my phone rang, and it was Ethan, and his voice had that particular quality that told me immediately this was not a checking in call. Mom, 1 word, 2 syllables, and I already knew. Sit down and tell me, I said, so he did. He and Amber were in trouble, real trouble. They owed $32,000 in credit card debt, accumulated over about 2 years of spending that outpaced income by a margin neither of them had apparently noticed until the notices started arriving. They were 2 months behind on rent. Their landlord had given them 60 days to either catch up or vacate. And Ethan admitted this part cost him something, I could hear it, that he had not been working since January. Not between positions, not exploring options, just not working. I had a hard time after COVID, he said. The remote teaching and then going back, and then I just kind of hit a wall, Mom. I burned out. And I know that's not an excuse, but that's what happened. I believed him. I had seen enough burnout in my career to recognize it, and I had watched Ethan struggle since the pandemic in ways I hadn't fully registered at the time because he was good at keeping the surface calm. But understanding why something happened doesn't mean you ignore what happened. And what had happened was that my 39-year-old son and his wife had quietly built themselves into a financial hole they couldn't climb out of on their own. What are you asking me, Ethan? A pause. We need somewhere to stay, just for a while, until I can get back on my feet. I looked around my house. 3 bedrooms, a garden, a guest room that hadn't been used since Robert's sister visited in 2021. I thought about what Robert would say. I knew what he would say. He would say, "Their family dot." All right, I said, but we're doing this with ground rules. I laid out 3 conditions. 1, Ethan actively pursues employment. Not casually, not occasionally, but consistently and with documentation he could show me. 2, they contribute $500 a month to household expenses, not because I needed it, but because living completely free sets a bad precedent for everyone involved, including them. 3, we revisit the arrangement after 6 months and have an honest conversation about next steps. They agreed to all 3. They moved in at the end of August 2023, Ethan, Amber, and Ethan's 2 kids from his first marriage, Lily, who was 14, and Noah, who was 12. Ethan's divorce from their mother, Karen, had been finalized 2 years earlier in 2021. It had been amicable enough. Karen had remarried and moved to Charlotte, and the kids split time between households. The first month was genuinely nice. Ethan helped me fix the fence in the backyard that I'd been meaning to get to for 2 years. Amber cooked dinner on Tuesday nights, and she was actually a good cook. Lily and Noah were excited about their new school. The house had life in it again, and I won't pretend I didn't appreciate that. But here's the thing about a slow drift. You don't feel it while it's happening. You only notice it when you look back at where you started and realize how far you've moved. The first small change was the ring light. Amber set it up in the living room in early October because, she explained, the natural light in there was perfect for her Instagram content. She'd been building an account called @AmberAtHome, slow living, intentional spaces, authentic family moments, her bio said, and she needed good lighting for photos. Could she use the living room in the mornings? I said yes, of course. By November, the mornings had stretched into all day, and the living room had gradually filled with photography equipment, props, backdrop stands, and a ring light that turned the room into something that looked like a low-budget production studio. My reading chair had been moved to a less convenient corner to improve traffic flow for content. The $500 monthly contribution stopped after September. When I brought it up, Ethan said they were having a harder month than expected and would make it up. He never did. I brought it up one more time in November, and the look on his face, not defensive, just exhausted and a little embarrassed, made me drop it. I told myself, give it time. They're adjusting. Beverly noticed before I did. We met for coffee in late October, and she looked at me across the table with the expression I knew meant she was about to say something I wasn't going to love. Dot, honey, she said. You look like someone who's been apologizing for existing. I'm fine. You said I'm fine 3 times in the last 10 minutes, and none of them were in response to a question about how you're doing. I tried to laugh it off. But driving home that afternoon, I thought about the book club meeting I'd skipped the month before because Amber had mentioned Noah wasn't feeling well, and she wasn't sure she'd be able to handle everything alone. I thought about the phone call with my old colleague Carol Osgood that I'd cut short because Lily needed help with homework. I thought about the dinner I'd been planning to host for 3 friends from the clinic that had been quietly rescheduled twice because there was always something going on in the house. I told myself it was just an adjustment period. I was wrong. By early 2024, 6 months had become 1 year, and nobody mentioned the original timeline. Ethan had applied to 2 jobs in that stretch. 2, one interview for a tutoring center position that he'd decided was beneath his qualifications. One application to a curriculum development company that he never followed up on after the initial submission. He had, however, launched a podcast, The Progressive Classroom, a show about educational philosophy and the future of teaching. He needed a decent microphone, 180, audio editing software, 240 per year, and a new laptop because his old one couldn't handle the recording quality, 200 refurbished. He asked if I could cover these as startup costs, since the podcast would eventually generate income. I said yes, because I still believed in the eventually. Amber's Instagram had reached about 2,400 followers by spring 2024, a number she described with genuine excitement as really gaining traction. She had pivoted from generic lifestyle content to what she called multi-generational living content, which turned out to mean photos of my house, my garden, my kitchen, and occasionally me, all presented as her family food. I found out about this not because she told me, but because Carol Osgood texted me a screenshot one afternoon with the message, Dot, is this your living room? And why is your daughter-in-law calling it our family's Nashville sanctuary? I pulled up the account. There was my living room with the quilt Robert's mother had made, the bookshelf I'd had since 1993, and the watercolor my friend Janet had given me for my 60th birthday, captioned, Sunday light in our cozy home. There's nothing like slowing down and being present in the space you've built together, the space she'd built together, in my house. There was a photo of my garden, 12 years of careful cultivation, the rose bushes Robert had planted the summer before he got sick, the herb garden I'd designed myself, captioned, Our garden has been such a source of peace this spring. Ethan and I are so grateful for this outdoor space we get to call ours. And there was a photo of me. Standing at the kitchen stove, back to the camera stirring something. Tagged. Ethan's mom showing us her famous chicken and dumplings. Not Dorothy, not Grandma Dot, just Ethan's mom, a supporting character in someone else's story. I put down my phone and went out to the garden and sat on the bench Robert had built for me in 2012, and I did something I hadn't done since the week after he died. I got angry, really genuinely angry, not at Amber's specifically, at myself for letting this happen, for being so focused on being accommodating that I hadn't noticed I was being erased. The physical changes in the house had continued throughout that year, each one small enough to seem reasonable in isolation. My reading room, the sunroom where I'd spent 10,000 evenings with a book, had become Lily's and Noah's homework space because they needed a quiet area away from the main living rooms. My kitchen cabinets had been reorganized twice for better flow. A shelf I'd used for my nursing reference books had been cleared to make room for Amber's photography props. My friend Carol called one afternoon, and the call went to voicemail. Then she called again. Then she texted, Dot, I've called 3 times this week. A woman keeps answering and saying you'll call back. Is everything okay? I hadn't received any message that Carol had called. When I asked Amber about it, she said, oh, she'd meant to tell me. Carol had called a couple times, but I'd been resting, and she hadn't wanted to bother me. She'd told Carol I was fine and would call back. She had been answering my phone and filtering my calls and framing it as kindness. That night, I lay in my bed and stared at that water stain in the corner of the ceiling, the one Robert had promised to fix in the spring of the year he died, and that I'd never had touched, because looking at it somehow made me feel close to him. And I thought about what Beverly had said. You look like someone who's been apologizing for existing. I called Carol back and talked to her for an hour. And at the end, Carol, who had known me for 25 years and had a gift for saying true things plainly, said, Dot, you know what this sounds like? It sounds like a patient who keeps telling me they feel fine, but their vitals say otherwise. You've spent your whole career knowing the difference between what someone says and what's actually happening. Don't stop knowing that just because it's your own life. I stayed up until midnight doing math in my head. The $500 monthly contribution that had stopped after 1 month. The grocery bills I was covering for a family of 4, easily 900 to 1,000 a month. The utilities that had jumped 60% with 4 additional people in the house. The $1,620 in podcast equipment, dance class for Lily at $180 a month, Noah's soccer club fees, $220 a month, random household expenses that had organically become my responsibility because I was there and I had the card. 30 months, about $200 per month on average. Something in the neighborhood of $90,000 to $95,000 total, give or take. Not money I didn't have, but money I had never agreed to spend this way. March 2026, a Monday. Coffee still brewing, 8:47 a.m. Ethan and Amber came into the kitchen together. They had the practiced look of people who had rehearsed something, and I noticed, the way you notice things after 35 years of reading situations quickly, that Amber was carrying a folder. Nobody carries a folder to a casual conversation. Mom, can we sit down for a second? Ethan said. We want to talk about something we've been thinking about. I poured my coffee. Sure. Amber opened the folder. There were printouts, photos actually, renovation photos. Basement conversions with shiplap walls and pendant lighting and little egress windows dressed up with curtains. We've been thinking about the space situation, Amber began, and we feel like the current layout isn't really working optimally for anyone. You know how the main bedroom gets that beautiful southern light all morning? I knew. We thought, and this is just an idea, we want to hear what you think. What if we turned that room into a proper creative studio for content creation and also for Ethan's podcast recording? And then we could do a really beautiful renovation of the basement level for you, like a proper suite, your own space, your own bathroom, your own everything. I looked at the photos. Finished basements with small windows, the kind of windows you look at and think, that's a lot of effort to call this a living space. And the cost of the renovation? I asked. Ethan jumped in. We've gotten a couple of quotes. somewhere between $18,000 and $22,000 for a full bathroom addition, proper insulation, the whole thing. And who pays for that? They looked at each other. That look, the one I'd seen 100 times in 2.5 years, the quick sideways check where they silently confirmed they were still on the same page. We thought it would be a shared family investment, Amber said. Shared family investment. I was going to pay $20,000 to renovate my own basement so that I could move into it and give them my bedroom. I set down my coffee cup. Let me think about it, I said. Amber's face lit up. Of course, take all the time I said, let me think about it, I repeated, not unkindly, but clearly. I'd like to sit here by myself now. They left, and I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. That night, I did not sleep well. Not because I was upset, or not only because I was upset, because I was thinking. The way I used to think on the long drives home from shifts, when everything was quiet and my brain finally had room to sort through what the day had handed it. I went to my bedroom and I sat on the edge of the bed Robert and I had shared for 34 years, and I picked up the framed photo I keep on the nightstand. Robert in the backyard, summer of 2014, holding a shovel with a broken handle because he refused to throw away anything that could still technically function. I thought, what would you tell me right now? He'd have said something simple. He always kept things simple. He'd have said, Dot, you know what to do. You always know what to do. You just keep waiting for permission from someone who isn't qualified to give it. I called Beverly at 10:15 p.m. She picked up on the second ring, which is how I knew she'd been awake waiting. Bev, I said, I need to talk. I told her everything, not just the basement proposal, all of it. Every slow drift, every quiet erosion, every moment I'd told myself, it's fine, it's family, this is just what you do. When I finished, Beverly was quiet for a moment. Then she said, do you want to stay at mine for a bit while you figure things out? And that was when I knew what I was going to do. But here's what happened 3 days later that turned a firm decision into an absolutely non-negotiable one. I was in the kitchen when I noticed Ethan's laptop open on the counter. He'd been there 5 minutes earlier and had stepped out to the backyard to take a call. The screen hadn't locked yet. It was an email thread between Ethan and Amber going back about 3 months. I want to be clear, I did not go looking through his email. The thread was open, visible, and I read the first few lines before I understood what I was looking at. And then I stood there and read enough to understand the situation completely. The content wasn't cartoonishly villainous. It wasn't a mustache-twirling plan. It was worse than that. It was practical, matter of fact. Two people talking through logistics. One email from Amber to Ethan from January. I think if we can get mom settled into the lower level and comfortable there, it opens up a real conversation about whether this place makes sense as a long-term family home. The location is great for the kids' school, and honestly, the space could be amazing with the right updates. One from Ethan February. I hear you. I think we just have to be patient with her. She's set in her ways, but she's not unreasonable. The basement suite framing is good. It lets her feel like she has her own space while we get the main house working the way it should. One from Amber, 2 weeks before the conversation in the kitchen. My sister asked about the house, and I told her that when things eventually transfer, we're thinking about doing a complete renovation. The bones are great, but it needs to be brought into this decade. When things eventually transfer, not if, when. I closed the laptop and put it back exactly where it had been. My hands were steady. My breathing was even. 35 years in emergency medicine will give you that. The ability to receive information that should knock you sideways and keep your external presentation completely calm while your internal self sorts through it with cold efficiency. I went to the garden and sat on Robert's bench and stayed there for 45 minutes. Then I came inside, went to my room, and called Sandra Pruitt. Sandra Pruitt had been a real estate attorney in Nashville for over 20 years. I'd met her through a hospital colleague years ago, and we'd kept in touch. When I explained what I needed, a clear understanding of my legal standing with respect to family members living in my home without a formal lease, she walked me through it calmly and completely. In Tennessee, without a formal lease agreement, they're tenants at will, Sandra said. You can terminate that arrangement with 30 days written notice. If they don't vacate, you pursue unlawful detainer proceedings through the court. And if I want to rent the property to a third party, is there anything that complicates that? Not if they receive proper notice and the timeline is handled correctly. Dorothy, is this a situation I should be concerned about? Are you safe? I'm fine, I said. I just need everything handled correctly and completely. And Sandra, I need this kept completely private until I'm ready to move. Understood. I'll start preparing the documents. The second call was to Beverly. She confirmed her spare room was available whenever I needed it. No questions, no conditions. The third call was to Morrison Property Management, a company a former colleague had used when she turned her house into a rental after moving to be closer to her grandchildren. I'd looked them up already. I called their office directly and made an appointment to meet with their director, David Morrison, in person rather than on the phone. Less traceable. David walked through the numbers with me over the course of an hour. East Nashville, 3 bedrooms, good school district, well maintained. He looked at the photos I'd brought. Conservative estimate, $3,000 to $3,200 a month, he said. Maybe higher depending on how quickly you want to place tenants. Market's strong right now. I want to be ready to list within 3 weeks, I said, and I want everything handled discreetly. He didn't ask why. He just said, we can do that. Over the following 2 weeks, I moved my most important belongings to Beverly's house gradually and carefully. A few things at a time. The irreplaceable items, the box of Robert's letters I kept in the closet, the photo albums from Ethan's childhood, the set of kitchen knives that had been my mother's, my financial documents, the small fireproof box where I kept deeds, insurance papers, and the letter Robert had written me sometime in the last weeks of his life that I had never fully been able to read and was not ready to lose. Carol Osgood helped me move a few pieces of furniture I wanted to keep, a small writing desk, the armchair from the sunroom that had been in my family for decades. She asked no questions and made no comments. She just showed up with her truck on a Saturday morning and helped me load it. During those 2 weeks, I was the most agreeable version of myself I had been since they moved in. I said yes to everything. I asked interested questions about the basement renovation timeline. I let Amber photograph me in the garden for her Instagram without complaint. I was pleasant at dinner and engaged with the kids about school and didn't object to a single thing. Ethan told Amber one evening, I overheard this accidentally, genuinely, I think she's finally coming around. She was not coming around. She was executing a plan. Friday, March 27, 2026, 10 in the morning. Sandra Pruitt was parked outside. The documents were ready. Morrison Property Management had a signed management agreement with a listing ready to activate. My personal belongings worth keeping were at Beverly's. I made coffee, set out 3 mugs, mine and 2 for Ethan and Amber, because I am still, even in the moments that matter most, someone who offers people coffee. Ethan, Amber, can you come down to the kitchen? I want to talk. They came in together. Amber was already smiling in a way that suggested she thought this was the conversation where I agreed to the basement plan. She sat down. Ethan sat beside her. I've been thinking about what you proposed, I said. And you're right, the current arrangement isn't working. Ethan's shoulders visibly relaxed. But the solution isn't me moving to the basement. I reached into the folder I'd placed on the counter the night before and set 2 envelopes on the table, one for each of them. I'm giving you both formal 30-day notices. I've decided to rent this property through Morrison Property Management, and I need you to find alternative housing by April 27th. The silence was complete. Amber looked at the envelope, then at me, then at the envelope again. Sandra Pruitt, my attorney, is outside if you want to verify that these documents are legally correct, I said. She can answer any questions about your rights and timeline under Tennessee law. Mom. Ethan's voice was strange, not angry, not loud, just genuinely uncomprehending. What? You can't just, we live here. You've been staying here, I said. There's a difference, and I've been happy to have you. But you asked me to give up my bedroom and move to the basement of my own home, and I've decided that's not something I'm willing to do. Amber found her voice. Dorothy, this is, We've been here 2.5 years. The kids are in school here. We have a whole life here. I know, I said. And I'm sorry the timeline is what it is. But 30 days is what the law requires, and that's what I'm giving you. Where are you going to live? Ethan asked. I've got it sorted out, I said. That's not something you need to worry about. Amber stood up. Her face was cycling through things: shock, anger, calculation, something that might have been the beginning of real understanding. This is because of the basement idea. We pushed too hard, and now you're. This is because of a lot of things that built up over a long time, I said. The basement idea was just the one that made it clear to me that waiting and hoping wasn't getting any of us anywhere. 30 days, Amber. Sandra's number is on the paperwork if you have questions. The kids got home from school at 3:30. This was the part I had been most anxious about. Not because I doubted my decision, but because Lily and Noah were innocent parties in all of this, and they were old enough to understand what was happening and young enough to be genuinely hurt by it. Lily walked in first, took one look at the kitchen, and said, "What happened?" Teenagers have radar for this kind of thing. "Come sit down," I said. "Both of you." Ethan started to speak, and I held up one hand, not rudely, just firmly. "Let me talk first," I told them plainly. Grandma Dot had decided it was time to move into a place of her own, and as a result, the house was going to be rented to a new family. Mom and Dad would be finding a new place for everyone to live. It would be a change, and change was hard, but everyone was going to be okay. Lily started crying immediately, big, teenage, the world is ending tears. Noah, true to form, just looked at me steadily with those dark eyes he'd had since he was a baby. "Did they do something wrong?" Noah asked. "Noah," Ethan started. "I'm asking Grandma Dot," Noah said. Not disrespectfully, just directly. I looked at this 13-year-old kid who had grown up watching adults manage things poorly and had apparently decided at some point that he would rather ask uncomfortable questions than pretend not to notice. "Yes," I said. "They made some choices about this house that weren't respectful of the fact that it's my home, and I let those choices go on for too long without saying anything. Both things are true." "Like what choices?" "They asked me to move to the basement so they could use my bedroom." Lily stopped crying for a second. "They wanted to put you in the basement?" "That was the plan, yeah." She looked at her father. The look a 15-year-old gives a parent when they've done something genuinely disappointing is a specific thing. It lands differently than anger. "Dad, it was more complicated than that," Ethan said. "It really wasn't, buddy," I said, and Ethan had the decency to look at the table. Then Noah said the thing that I will remember for the rest of my life. After Lily had gone upstairs and Ethan and Amber had drifted into the living room to make hushed, urgent phone calls, Noah stayed at the kitchen table. "Just the two of us." "Grandma Dot," he said. "I knew something wasn't right. For a long time, I could see you getting smaller." I looked at him. "Like, not physically," he said. "Just. You used to be a certain way when you were here by yourself. And then we moved in and you started being different. Like you were trying to take up less room. 13 years old. You were right," I said. "I was. I should have said something to you." "That wasn't your job, Noah. That was mine." "I should have said something to myself a lot sooner." He nodded. "Then, are we still going to see you?" "All the time," I said. "I'm not leaving your life. I'm just leaving this house. There's a big difference." He thought about that for a moment. "Okay," he said. And the way he said it told me he actually believed it, which was all I needed. The 30 days that followed were not quiet. Ethan called almost every day in the first week. The calls moved through predictable stages: disbelief, then hurt, then anger, then bargaining, then something that started to look like acceptance. On day 4, he called and said, "Mom, you have to understand that we genuinely thought we were helping you. We thought you wanted more privacy." "Ethan," I said, "I want you to listen to what you just said. You thought I wanted to live in the basement. Did you ever ask me?" Silence. "Did you ask me if I was happy with the arrangement? Did you ask me what I needed? Did you check in one single time in 2.5 years and say, 'Mom, how's this working for you?' No, that's the problem. Not that you needed help, not that you needed a place to stay. The problem is that you started treating my home and my life like resources to manage instead of treating me like a person to respect. He didn't have an answer for that, but he didn't hang up either, which I took as a good sign. On day 9, Amber called. Just Amber, not a joint call. She said, I want to apologize. Not to ask you to change your mind, I know you're not going to. Just to say that I know I made this worse. I got so caught up in building this image of our life that I stopped seeing your life as separate from mine. I used your home as a backdrop and your presence as content, and I never once asked if that was okay with you. It was the most honest thing Amber had said to me in 2.5 years. Maybe the most honest thing she'd said to anyone in a while. I appreciate that, I said. It matters. Does it change anything? No, but it matters anyway. Twist 4. Ethan gets a job in week 2. On day 11, Ethan called with a different energy in his voice. I got a job. Tell me, curriculum coordinator position at a private school in Brentwood. I applied last week. A pause. After you gave us the notice. I let that sit for a moment. I'm genuinely glad, Ethan. The thing is, I had been looking at this listing for 3 months. Before all this happened, I just never submitted the application. Why not? Another pause. Longer this time. Because if I applied and didn't get it, that would mean I'd failed at something else. And as long as I didn't try, I couldn't fail. His voice dropped a little. It's stupid. I know it's stupid. It's not stupid, I said. It's human. But Ethan, you needed to not have a safety net. That's on me as much as it's on you. I made it too easy to not try. You were being a good mom. I was being a comfortable mom. Those aren't always the same thing. He started the job on April 14th. He texted me that evening. First day done. It was good. I forgot I was actually pretty decent at this. I held my phone and felt something unclench in my chest that had been tight for longer than I'd realized. I moved into Beverly's guest room on April 1st while I looked for a place of my own. It took me 12 days to find the right apartment. Not a penthouse. I wasn't looking for a statement. I was looking for a home. What I found was a 2-bedroom on the 4th floor of a newer building in Germantown, about 2 miles from the old house. Clean lines, good light, a small balcony that looked out over a pocket park where people walked dogs in the morning. $1,650 a month. My own lease, my name on the door. The day I moved in, really moved in, with my furniture arranged the way I wanted it, my books on the shelves, in the order that made sense to me, my mother's kitchen knives in the drawer where I could find them. I made coffee at 7 a. and sat on the balcony and watched the park wake up. There was a man walking a beagle, a woman jogging with headphones, 2 kids on bikes with a dad running alongside, slightly out of breath. Ordinary Tuesday morning. And I thought, this is what it feels like to be in your own life. Not taking up less space, not adjusting to someone else's schedule or noise level or vision of what the home should look like. Just present in a space that was mine on a morning that belonged to me. Beverly came by that afternoon with a bottle of wine and flowers from her garden. She's been growing dahlias for 20 years and they're spectacular. And we sat on the balcony until the light went gold and she said, "There you are." "There I am," I agreed. The house in East Nashville rented quickly. Young couple relocating from Cincinnati. He was in healthcare administration. She was a music teacher. They signed a 12-month lease at $3,150 per month. David Morrison sent me a photo they'd sent him. The garden in early May, the roses starting to come up, everything tidy and cared for. They texted me directly after a month to ask what I used on the herb garden beds. We've been texting occasionally ever since. They're good people. Ethan and Amber found a 3-bedroom rental in Antioch. Smaller than my house, different school district, but Lily and Noah adjusted faster than anyone expected. Kids are more resilient than adults give them credit for when the adults around them are being honest about what's happening instead of managing it. By May, Ethan had been at his new job for 3 weeks and was sounding more like himself than he had in years. Focused, engaged, occasionally frustrated in the specific way that means you care about something. Amber had taken on part-time marketing work for a nonprofit and had started rebuilding her Instagram from scratch. Less staging, more reality. Twist 5 Amber's post. In late May, Amber posted something on @AmberAtHome that was unlike anything she'd posted in 3 years on that account. No ring light, no styled background. Just her, sitting at what was clearly a kitchen table in a much smaller, less Instagram perfect space, and a long caption. She wrote about what had happened, not in a way that blamed anyone specifically, not me, not Ethan, not herself entirely. She wrote about how she'd spent years building a version of her life for an audience and had slowly stopped being able to tell the difference between what she actually wanted and what photographed well. She wrote about borrowing someone else's home, someone else's garden, someone else's life, and presenting it as hers. And she wrote to us about what it felt like when the person whose life she'd borrowed finally said enough, and how, in the rubble of that, she was trying to figure out who she actually was. The post got 51,000 interactions in 48 hours. Not because it was polished, because it was true. I saw it because Lily screenshotted it and sent it to me with the message. Mom posted something real. Thought you should see it. I read it twice. Then I sent Amber a text. This is the best thing you've ever written. She wrote back. It's the first thing I've written that I wasn't performing. It's June 2026. I've been in my apartment for about 6 weeks. This morning, I woke up at 6:45 without an alarm. My body's been resetting to its natural schedule now that I'm not being roused by a household that runs on other people's timelines. I made coffee with the beans I actually like, which are expensive and which I had stopped buying. Because when you're buying coffee for 5 people, you don't spend $18 on a bag of single origin Ethiopian. I read the newspaper on the balcony. I watched the dog walker go by. I had exactly the morning I wanted to have. Lily calls me every Friday after school. We talk about books mostly. She started reading more seriously this year and has opinions, strong ones, which I love. Noah came over last Sunday with a chess set he'd found in the garage of their new rental. It had been Robert's, one of the things I'd let Ethan take when he moved in. And finding it, there was one of those small, unexpected things that hit differently than you expect. We played 2 games. He beat me both times. Grandpa taught you well, I told him. You taught me better than you think, he said, and the kid is 13 and already better at saying true things than most adults I know. Ethan and I have lunch once a month. Real lunch. He pays, which I didn't ask for, but which I think matters to him. We talk about the job, about the kids, about things that have nothing to do with any of this. Last month, he told me about a student in his class who reminded him of himself at that age, and he was trying to figure out how to challenge the kid without overwhelming him. It was a good conversation, the kind of conversation we should have been having for years. Amber and I are not close. I don't think we will be, and I think that's honest and fine. But we're civil, and we're real with each other, and that's more than we had for most of the time she was living in my house. Here's what I want to say if you've stayed with me this far. I spent 35 years in emergency medicine because I believed that showing up for people when they needed it most was one of the most meaningful things a human being could do. I still believe that. I don't regret helping Ethan and his family. I don't regret the 2.5 years of generosity, even the parts that were taken for granted. Because I went into it with the right intentions and I learned something true. What I regret is the waiting. The months I spent telling myself it would get better on its own. The times I shrank myself to fit a space I'd been gradually pushed into. The moments I apologized for my own preferences in my own home. I should have said something sooner. That's on me. But here's the thing about should-haves. They're only useful if they teach you something for next time. And what I learned is this. Generosity is a gift you give freely. The moment it starts feeling like a tax you're paying to keep the peace, something has gone wrong, and you're allowed to name it. Setting limits with people you love is not abandonment. It is not cruelty. It is the only way to have a relationship that is real instead of a relationship that is convenient. And you do not have to wait until someone tries to move you to the basement to decide that you deserve better. You can decide that any Tuesday. You can decide it right now. I'm 68 years old. I live alone in an apartment that is entirely mine. I have a balcony and a coffee ritual and grandchildren who call me on Fridays and a best friend who brings dahlias. I have a son who is finally becoming the person I always knew he could be, and a daughter-in-law who is doing the hard work of figuring out who she actually is. And I have the water stain in the bedroom ceiling of a house I no longer own. I can picture it exactly. I'll always be able to picture it. And I have made my peace with the fact that some things you carry with you, not because you can't let go, but because letting go doesn't mean forgetting. Robert used to say, You are the most capable person I have ever known. I just wish you'd remember that when I'm not in the room. I remember it now.
When I first came across Dorothy's story, the thing that stopped me wasn't the ending. It was a question I couldn't shake. How does someone who spent 35 years making life or death decisions in an ER spend 2.5 years not seeing that her own life had become a crisis? And I think the answer is this: when the people causing harm are people you love, your brain finds a reason every single time. Not because you're weak, because you love them. Dorothy wasn't a pushover. She was a woman who kept choosing her family until choosing them meant losing herself. And the moment she recognized that, and for you, everything changed. The lesson here isn't don't help the people you love. It's help them, yes, but not past the point where your generosity has quietly become their expectation. Not at the cost of your dignity. Not at the cost of your home. And you are allowed to take up space in your relationships, in your own life. If this story hit something true for you and have you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. I'll see you in the next one. I'll see you in the pipori ar muli falpai.